Добрий день.
Good morning. I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum. It's my pleasure to see all of you here. It's August 14 and we start our work today. It's been 10 years of the war and today is day 537 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by Russian aggressor. And today we will be talking about a very important topic, the Crimean political prisoners held in captivity by the Russians. They are not being provided medical help. We know in February 23, two political prisoners have died in captivity, and we understand that this is the problem we should give publicity to. This is why we have invited all of you here today to tell about those lists of the prisoners who are not being medically treated by Russia. I want to introduce our speakers today. It's Victoria Nesterenko, project manager at Dzhemil Human Rights Center. Joining us in this studio also is Igor Kotelyanets, the head of the Association of Relatives of Political Prisoners of the Kremlin. Joining us online is Lutfiya Zudiyeva, Crimean human rights activist and journalist. Joining us in this studio is Irina Sedova, expert at Crimean Human Rights Group, and joining us online is Lilia Suleimanova, wife of a political prisoner, Ahmed Suleimanov, who has a heart condition and is being kept in captivity still. Miss Victoria, I would like to give the floor to you. Please tell us about this problem. Tell us about the list of those who are being held in captivity and the threat that is posed to them. Thank you. Good morning. As we know, since the beginning of this year, two Ukrainian political prisoners have died in Crimea and in Russia, Gafarov and Shyrinh. It happened because Russia systemically refuses to provide the medical treatment to Ukrainian political prisoners, and this is exactly why we have started the project Zmina to support our political prisoners who suffer from not being medically treated in captivity. So with our partners we gathered and we processed the information about the political prisoners who suffer in the colonies, in the prisons, in the confinement cells located in Crimea and in the Russian Federation. So we put together a list listing 45 persons who one way or another during their captivity were facing Russians' refusal to provide them with medical treatment. And another list we have listing 21 people are people who require immediate medical treatment, so their life is in danger right now. Russia systemically refuses to provide medical treatment to Ukrainian political prisoners. They refuse to accept any applications submitted by the prisoners stating that they want to get some medical treatment. They refuse to hand over the medicines from the relatives to those prisoners, and even when they allow any medical examinations, those examinations last no more than 5 minutes or have no medical substance or any conclusion drawn from them, or otherwise the political prisoners are not being given any medicines, or handover of medicines from relatives or their lawyers is being prevented or otherwise impeded. So we're talking about the people whose life is in danger now. We want to urge the occupational authorities, the authorities of Russia, to set the prisoners free, to provide them with immediate emergency medical aid, to start medical examinations, the medical examination of their health condition, because what Russia is doing is violation of international humanitarian law and Rome Statute. This is why we also want our government to pay attention to what's going on there too. Thank you. Mr. Yuri, can we talk about the specific cases that we know about? What is the condition of the political prisoners? Good morning. Today we're talking about the political prisoners of Kremlin, about those people that we know for sure. We know for sure about their whereabouts. We know what is the type of criminal persecution that Russia executes against them or exercises against them. And we're talking based on the cases that were taking place before the beginning of the full-scale invasion, because we clearly understand that after the beginning of the full-scale invasion, the number of such people has grown times and times. The people who were detained in the newly occupied territories due to the political motives. And today we know very little about them, but still we know the numbers. For example, what the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights says is that at least 25,000 civilians were detained, but we're talking about the list of those specific people whose whereabouts are identified and whose cases are relatively old. There are 150 such people on the list of our organization. We know that the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights and the Office of President has more than 180 people on such lists. So many of those people were suffering tortures and they continue to endure them. The tortures that are exercised by the hands of the administration of the colonies by not providing them with medical aid and being kept in severe conditions, thus violating their rights. We know that according to the international humanitarian law, or refusal to provide medical treatment is equal with the tortures, is a kind of torture. So now we present the list of those who are being held in specifically severe conditions. Obviously, many prisoners who are in the prisons of Russia now, they ended up there already having some chronic conditions. Some of them were already disabled by then, or otherwise they have other medical conditions that continue deteriorating there. My colleagues have already mentioned that non-provision of medical treatment resulted this year in the death of two political prisoners, Dzhemil Gafarov and Kostiantyn Shyrinh. And the most widespread problems that we know about and that we have information about among the political prisoners, they have ill kidneys, teeth, hypertony, impairment or loss of sight and hearing, like Irina Danilovich, for example, has. It results from bad or malnutrition or bad nutrition or fabricated situations under which the penitentiary system of Russia creates the conditions of detention which are unbearable for the people. We know that people are being held for months in confinement cells. The mother of the prisoner describes those conditions as the concrete pit where people are forced to sleep on the concrete floor, and they have serious problems with kidneys and other organs. They are being tortured by not being allowed to sleep. They don't have normal nutrition, and it looks like a program of slow death. Not like some active actions against them, but the creation of conditions where people just slowly die. We understand that all the political prisoners in Russia are in a very difficult conditions because they are on their own against the enemy, against the hostile environment. Before that, we could reach out to them through consulates, through lawyers. So now there is no consular representation of Ukraine in Russian Federation, and the lawyers can reach out to only some specific persons because they understand that the lawyers who work with Ukrainians, they are under risk too, and it's difficult to find such lawyers in Russia generally. Generally, those who suffer from such conditions are the people of some respected age, they're pensioners like Oleg Prihodko, Volodymyr Dudko, Zikirya Muratov, and their sentences are very long. They have chronic conditions which are getting even worse now, and they should get some medical treatment to support normal functioning of their organism. And periodically we know that in Russia they like just torturing Ukrainian prisoners, just like in case of Ivan Yatskev, who was brought out to the street at -14 naked. They were waiting for that person's limb to become violet color, and then he was brought back into his cell. Well, they usually do it under some fabricated reasons, or sometimes the relatives could have handed over a t-shirt with Ukrainian symbols, and this is why the prisoners are getting punished for that. A lot of pressure is exercised right now. One of the latest cases that has happened to a political prisoner, Volodymyr Yakimenko, just a couple of weeks ago. For an umpteenth time, Volodymyr Yakimenko, who is being held in the town of Pukhachov, was forced to work at the colony, and they saw the clothing, the uniforms for law enforcement agencies of Russia, which is another type of psychological torture. So Volodymyr Yakimenko refused to work on the Russian economy, and he was threatened to be tortured if he doesn't do that. And Volodymyr Yakimenko decided that he better cut his veins rather than allow those tortures. So cut veins is better than something that he was already enduring from them. After it happened, they were not able to provide him with relevant medical treatment. His hand was just bandaged, and those bandages were replaced like within 1 week. That's pretty much it. And in the winter, this same Volodymyr Yakimenko was applying to a prison doctor, and he said he wouldn't be treated because Hochhals should be rather killed than treated. So this is the citation of the doctor. So with fever, with high temperature, he was sent to just stay in his cell. And another type of torture is information isolation. We see the situation with Metro Shtiblik, with whom the family cannot get in touch for years, and just to understand what's going on with him, to see him. And those cases are multiple. And talking about exercising pressure on Russia to have them stop this type of torture and to pay the attention of Ukrainian government to the situations occurring to Ukrainian citizens, and the government should make some steps to protect their right to medical treatment. And within the exchanges of prisoners, there are no people who got those long terms under political motives, who ended up in Russian prisons, who were imprisoned before the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Those people are not on the exchange list. We know that the government agencies, they have the list of those to be exchanged, just like our organization and other the civil rights organizations. We were handing over such lists to the government, but they are not being freed, and it's a big problem which should be solved now. And I believe such information events, such publicity events, and systemic advocacy of this matter is capable of start these processes moving, and we can seek Russia setting them free. But there is yet another problem inside of our state, that when those people are set free, let's imagine they're being set free within a month and there's some exchange, they would not be able to get normal full-fledged medical treatment in Ukraine either. They will be free, they will have access to medical services, but those medical services should be paid for. But and unfortunately, for the time being, regardless of the fact that the law on social and legal support of the political prisoners took effect in November last year, that contemplates that the government provides the full psychological and medical rehabilitation for those people for free. If they come back tomorrow, nobody is doing it for them, since the government has not approved the list of services. Even if those people come back tomorrow, there is no mechanism in place, and it's a very big problem. We had active communications with the government, with the Ministry of Reintegration, first of all, because the Ministry of Reintegration is being headed by Mrs. Vice Prime Minister, whose position is higher than the minister, and according to the law on Ministry of Reintegration, she can push those issues, and the Ministry of Health, which for the time being has not developed or approved that procedure, we were only getting answers from the Ministry of Health that in that part of the law they are guided by the existing provisions, existing law, existing resolution that regulates the mechanism of provision of medical aid to people with disability. But the fact that people are coming back from prisoners, they are not always disabled. They were suffering the tortures, but they are not still disabled, and it's quite surprising that this procedure is being guided by that mechanism. So we should develop a new mechanism, because the situation is surprising when we talk about atrocities of Russia, but at the same time we state that this government machine has done no proper things that are contemplated by the law for the political prisoners. Well, when we talk about Crimean prisoners, political prisoners, we have to remember that those people stay in captivity for years, most of them, and they stay there for long terms, and their health is seriously impaired. Miss Victoria, maybe we get back to our presentation and we show this list. Well, we have 21 people on our list that we segregated out of 45 people who one way or another were facing some type of pressure related to non-provision of medical treatment in confinement cells and prisons and colonies of Russian Federation and occupied Crimea. This list is available at the website of zmina.info. It can be reviewed there as well. There is a significant number of people who are imprisoned in the Russian Federation. Some of them are in occupied Crimea, and such people as Oleg Prihodko and Irina Danilovich, they are being transported currently, so it's not yet clear where they will be located in Russian Federation, in which facilities, and it's unclear what will be the conditions of detention there. Thank you very much, Miss Lilia. We hope that you're seeing and hearing us. Miss Lilia, are you with us? Yes, yes. We know that your husband is currently in captivity, so if we may ask you to share any information about his whereabouts, about his health condition, what is known about him. We're not seeing you, but we hope that our technical team is about to put you on the screen. Good morning. I'm a wife of Ahmed Suleimanov. My name is Lilia Suleimanova. were searches in Bakhchisarai on 11th of March, and two Umerov brothers were detained with their uncle. I'm sorry. Also, the law enforcement representatives broke into our house with searches. And he was prescribed a home arrest. Well, we're hearing you very bad now. I need to mention that Miss Lilia, it looks like the communication is not good enough. Oh, we're hearing you now, Miss Lilia. Let us try. The connection is very bad.
Поки наша технічна
Meanwhile, our technical team is arranging the connection with Miss Lilia. We're putting Miss Lutfia through. Good morning. How do you hear me? Oh, we can hear and see you clearly. So can you please share some cases known to you with us? I would like to start today's conversation with the fact that the right to the life, the right to the medical treatment is a basic integral right of any person, no matter what are the accusations against them and what crimes they are accused of. The story with the political prisoners of Crimea, their basic rights were violated multiple times. They were first violated when the law enforcement the armed people broke into their homes. They intimidated the kids and they started pressing charges against them. Their rights were violated when they were forcibly brought out of Crimea. Meanwhile, those people did not agree to that. They call it hybrid deportation. They compare those events with the events of the year 1944 and so on. And now Russia continues to violate their rights, and this is the most frightening level because their violation of rights is related to the physical security of those people with their health, with their life. And in case of Dzhemil Gafarov and Kostiantyn Shyrinh, it evidences that we are facing quite serious risks here. In Crimean solidarity, we get complaints on a regular basis. Complaints for non-exercising of their rights to health. One of the most prominent cases I want to talk about to make sure that the listeners and those who will study the situation for their own, so that they understand that we don't exaggerate, we have serious violations here. So the first thing all of the prisoners are facing, regardless of whether they are on the list that was presented just now or not, are the huge delays and difficult access to the doctors. For example, the mother of Raif Iziev, who is in confinement cell of Novocherkassk, have problem with varicosis, but there is no reaction from the prison doctors. He was facing a problem of some rash on his body, and he doesn't understand even the origins of that medical problem. The doctors just don't react to that problem at all. Timur Yelkabov in Dimitrovgrad, a Russian colony, his chronic disease, he suffers from asthma and he had a stroke recently. They called a doctor and the doctor has come 2 days after that asking, what's your complaint? So this is the reaction, and this is the similar story in multiple cases. Another problem almost all of the prisoners are facing is the absence of necessary medicines or their replacement with unfit analogs with some equivalents, because the prison doctors, they don't have relevant medicines and they prescribe something that is absolutely not relevant. This is what happened to Dzhemil Gafarov. He was prescribed unnecessary medicines, and his wife was trying to get a permit to send those medicines at least from home. Another problem is the prohibition of handover of the medicines from the relatives or from the lawyers, or the prohibition of handover of any medicines that would relieve them of pain. There was a notification from a wife of Usman Abdurazakov, one of the persons recently detained in Dzhemil district. So he was asking for kneecaps because he suffers arthrosis and his knees hurt. So the family hands over those kneecaps, and on the 8th of August, the prison administration accepts those kneecaps from their relatives, and they don't hand them over to the prisoner. So this is what the prisoners are facing. And yet another problem is a formal nature of medical examination and treatment. Even when people submit complaints, even when they seek exercising of their right to health through the lawyers, they are being transported to hospitals. It's all very formal. We were seeing what was going on with Irina Danilovich, with her case. She was promised to be transported to a civil hospital to be treated. She was even forced to announce a hunger strike, but as soon as she decided to break it in response to being transported to a civilian hospital, all of the attention to her situation with health have disappeared, and all those actions that were to treat her were of formal nature. And this morning her father has reported that in Zelenokursk, in the colony in Russia, where she was transported recently, she is not being treated. She called for a doctor to explain the situation with the earache, with her otitis. So the doctor said that when you lose your hearing, no noises are going to disturb you. So this is the level of their attitude. She was taking away all of the medicines she brought with her, and until now she is not giving away any of that. Yet another story with the political prisoner is Siran Kharedinov, a construction worker from Bakhchisarai. He was recently hospitalized to a tuberculosis hospital in Rostov district. He had a rash, an unidentifiable rash on his body. He had high temperature, and he was put in a cell with another prisoner who was diagnosed with HIV, hepatitis type C, and so on. So he was transported to the hospital to be treated against one disease, and now he ends up under risk to contract other infectious diseases. And even when the Russian legislation, or when the administration of the colonies communicates such a provision of Russian legislation that the prisoners may get additional treatment they can pay for by independent doctors. So if you want to pay your family or you want to help your family members, you have to pay. And even when the relatives do that, they pay money out of the family budgets. The results of that examination are not being considered, so it's a formality for the prison administrations. This is the case that occurred to Azamat Yurupov. He's 63 years old, and he was sentenced to 17 years. So he suffered 4 strokes in confinement cell, and the lawyer sought independent examination in a civil hospital for him. So the doctor made an opinion that his life is in danger, he's in critical condition, but that opinion was left without attention of the prison administration, and that man continues to stay in captivity. And yet another situation I would like to mention today is the situation with the human rights activist Emir Koku, who was brought out of the colony in Salavat and who underwent surgery. First, he was suspected to have problems with his kidneys, but the doctors found out it was his intestines. The operation resulted in non-reporting to him what was the problem with his health. He was just brought back to the colony and thrown there, and obviously there is no rehabilitation treatment, there is no diet which is mandatory in his case, in case of intestine surgery. So there is no even talking about the treatment is only in calling his wife, and so she can Google what he can do and what he cannot do, what he can and cannot eat, for example. This is the problems that are faced by the prisoners, and I think that to help them we need to arrange the face-to-face communication between the human rights organization and the Office of Ukrainian Commissioner for Human Rights, with the prisons, where they get letters about the health conditions of the prisoners. We need to seek individual control of the health monitoring and control of the health condition of those people. We have to seek the participation of the International Commission of Red Cross, so they monitor the situation with the political prisoners, so that they organize the missions, the field missions, so that they can visit those people in the colonies. And also we have to dispute every such case in all the institutions, both in Russian Federation and on international level. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Lutfier, for getting involved in our conversation. Ms. Irina, I would like to give the floor to you, and I want to ask you, what should the Ukrainian government do to fight things like this, the cases like this? We are studying this problem with the beginning of occupation of Crimea. We started documenting the cases in 2015. We have the list of the people involved in those crimes. Those list more than 100 such people, and persecution of every political prisoner is exercised by tens of persons, not one single person, because they include not only the representatives of FSB who fabricate the criminal cases. Those lists include persecutors that are non-active, because inactivity is also a crime in this case. Those lists include the names of the representatives of the Office of Commissioner for Human Rights of Russia. It includes persecutors who visit the court proceedings, the hearings. They know about all the violations, but they don't react. The list include the judges of different levels who see that the people are sick, they have medical conditions, they have evidences of those conditions, but they continue sentencing even those people who cannot stay in the prisons, even according to the Russian legislation. And now we want to recommend the Ukrainian government what can be done now, not to wait until the end of the war, but to start moving this situation and to try to arrange it, to settle it. So we recommend to thoroughly investigate every single case, to gather the evidences for every single person who is involved in persecution of those people. We are ready to help, and we are already helping. We document all those violations, and with Dzhemil we work on putting together the list of everybody who was involved in persecutions. We will hand over the list to the prosecutor's office, and we will attempt, in cooperation with our government, to make sure that all of the perpetrators are brought to liability, and to make sure that all of those perpetrators end up on the sanction list. For example, they try to mimicry, where they resigned from those Crimean offices where they were performing their crimes, but we document everything. We try to make sure that those people do not dissolve somewhere. Because sometimes the directors of those medical units of the penitentiary services, they say they're medics, but in fact they all have military ranks or police ranks. They're majors, captains, lieutenant colonels. They have information about those political prisoners, what type of treatment they need, but they intentionally do it in a way that the people are not treated. So it's an instrument of torture. The heads, the directors of the confinement cells, they give order for their subordinates not to take medicines from their relatives. They don't even come close to those prisoners. So, like Dzhemil Gafarov, when he was brought to the hospital, the lawyer sought it. He was seeking it within months, so he was chained. He was chained to the bed in the hospital, and the doctor has not even come close to him. They said he's a terrorist, and they do not want to approach him. So the recommendation we want to communicate to our government is to create the effective mechanism of bringing back the civilian prisoners. There are exchanges for the military prisoners, but there are no humanitarian law standards that result in exchange of civilians to civilians, because it may result in terrible crimes where people are being taken to captivity right in the streets. But this is exactly what happens now. So to have those civilians put on the list to be returned, at least we have to add those who may not make it by the end of the war. Unfortunately, there are already documented cases that we've discussed today. And just like my colleague have said, we have to seek the proper work of the international humanitarian monitoring missions in the occupied territories and in Russia, who would give publicity to those problems, because when the problems are being given publicity, there are more chances to save the lives of those people. Also, we may try to involve the international humanitarian organizations in negotiations like ICRC, if they provide some lists of these people who are ill, they may be set free, maybe not wait until the end of the war. In the same way, the Ukrainian government should support civil organizations like ours, like my colleagues, organizations who try to find ways to document and to help those ill political prisoners in Crimea. It's a difficult work. I understand that the government resource is not enough, but it's important to do this work right now, to document it and to provide all the support available. Also, I think that it's necessary to create an area of work, a pool of specialists who would try to set the civilian prisoners free. Like Igor Catalan says, a people with disability was kidnapped in Kherson region, and he was put in Crimean confinement cell, but no one recognizes that he is there. However, we have such evidences that he is held there. There should be a government program developed for physical and psychological rehabilitation of those who were brought back from captivity, and for their family members, because the family members suffer too when you see your relative, your close one, dying in captivity and nothing is done to help that. It's a huge stress for those family members. We need a state program which would allow us to relieve the stress for those people. We need to develop it step by step, and then we'll seek funding for that. Another law that my colleague has already mentioned about the support of the political prisoners, it's very well written, but it has to be amended by certain standards to be developed, so it's not only on paper, it should work. Also, the families of the prisoners may get 100,000 hryvnias, are entitled to such payment per year, per every year of the captivity. So we need to allocate funds for that, for the families. It's important. Those families who get that support from the government, they can try to agree with the lawyer who can physically enter the colony, and maybe they can seek to have some medicines sent to them from home, because it's the only chance to save them for the time being. The medicines that the relatives can send in some parcels to get people treated, because nothing is done in this regard in the detention facilities. We hope we will be able to make all of those things happen to improve the condition of those people and to just set them free after our victory, so they come back to their families.
Чи є в нашій
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm having a question to all of you. Do we have any historic cases when we were able to bring any of the prisoners back, knowing that they were ill, they had some medical conditions? Can we appeal to such cases, or maybe there are some historic cases that we can appeal to apply them to our political prisoners? Look, there are no such successful cases, because setting free such political prisoners that we talk about here, we're talking about people who were imprisoned before the beginning of the full-scale invasion. Yes, some of them were set free before the beginning of the full-scale invasion. For example, in September 2019, when the sailors were set free, along with them 11 political prisoners were set free. When the Ukrainian side was putting together the list, when we were putting together the list of those we submit for exchange, we were taking into account the condition of the people, and we wanted to take back those who needed most of all. And talking about the mechanisms that could be working now, about the coordination headquarters on prisoners of war, they say they submit the list of those civilians, they take into account that component, and I want to believe that some logic of prioritization exists there, that those who can die within a month, they should be pulled out of there first, to give them a chance for life. But as my colleague Irina has mentioned, we need to create the mechanism to set free the civilian prisoners, and we know that in the government there are agencies which initiated the creation of such mechanism back in previous year. We know that the Commissioner for Human Rights Office even had a project to have a working team. The working team at the coordination headquarters deals with the issues of the civilian prisoners. I don't know, maybe something has changed within the last weeks, but according to the information from the Office of the Commissioner for Human Rights, that project remains in the President's office unsigned. So we just illustrate some critical situation for the people who wait for this mechanism to set them free, but the government should find time to approve it and to start doing something about that. Thank you, dear friends. If you have any questions from the floor. Good afternoon, Valentina Rangel, Ukrinform. We know that a lot of political prisoners are being transported and in fact deported from temporarily occupied Crimea to the territory of Russian Federation. So if we compare the conditions of their detention in Russia and temporarily occupied Crimea, are they different? And the level of medical treatment, can we assert that such transportation is done to increase the tortures against the political prisoners? Thank you. Well, we document all of those cases for a number of years, and I would like to say that here, first of all, it depends on the administration of the facilities itself, because in some colonies some partial medical aid is provided, and some of such colonies are being managed by some cities. They have horrible conditions there, like in Sevastopol, for example. Dzhemil Gafarov had ill kidneys, and he was writing letters that the temperature in his cell was 10 degrees, so they intentionally create such conditions that would be horrible for the people. For example, there is confinement cell number 3 of Novocherkassk. All the prisoners complain not only that they are not provided medical aid, but the conditions of detention are just unfit for life. You know, the penitentiary service, they have the sleeping cars. They pack the people in those railway cars, and they transport people to Russia in the conditions most horrible that can be described. Those who were set free, they were telling us about those conditions. He was transported for a number of days to Russia. It may take up to several weeks even. So before those people are brought to some very remote colony, they are put in some confinement cells, like in Krasnodar, where they are being only thrown in a cell to be put on the floor without linens, without mattresses. The lawyers know about those violations, and they submit the complaints to the prosecutor's office of Russia. They submit the complaints to the courts, but they don't react because it's a government policy not to react to those violations of rights. So they all should be properly documented and investigated, so we understand what detention facilities should be pressed on the soonest possible to improve the conditions of detention. And if those complaints would come in mass, maybe those managers or directors would be fired, and some saner people would be appointed to those positions who would ensure normal or better conditions of detention for those prisoners. Thank you very much. We will try to put Miss Lilia Suleimanova on the screen again. Miss Lilia, if you're hearing us, please let us know. Unfortunately, we cannot put Miss Lilia on, or we have more questions. Stanislav Klich, journalist, former prisoner of Kremlin. I have a question to Mr. Kotelyanets. It's a known situation that the political prisoners cannot get an excerpt from the register that is supposed to be provided by the Ministry of Reintegration about us being the political prisoners, so legally we're absent. I think this is a very important problem for the people who will be coming back. Like, for example, Andrei Zathey recently has come back, and I hope the other ones would be coming back too. However, after the beginning of the year 2022, the conditions of detention has become way worse, which is evidenced by the death of the political prisoners, which was not the case in the last decade. So until this very moment, we cannot get those excerpts, and my question is, does this register even exist? Well, I hope it does really exist, because there are people who this year they've made it, the people who experienced the imprisonment, they underwent the commission, and they are entitled, I hope, to this payment of 100,000 hryvnias per year. The problem with the excerpt from the register, I know it exists, but it's difficult for me to comment anything, because we try to both officially and unofficially to have the Ministry of Reintegration moving this year, because after the president has signed the law on social and legal support of the political prisoners last year, they had 6 months to put together all the legal acts that would be necessary for implementation of this law. It's difficult for me to comment. If there is a representative of the Ministry of Reintegration, maybe they could comment why it was not done after half a year, neither after 1 year, and why is it written in a law like that. Why such political prisoners as Stanislav Klich, who has just asked this question, or other ones who were set free before the law has taken effect, they are supposed to automatically to be recognized by the government as political prisoners, but neither Oleg Sentsov nor Stanislav Klich nor other ones are recognized by the government as political prisoners automatically after the law has taken effect. The vision of the Ministry of Reintegration is such that they should submit to the commissions after years after liberation and to prove once again that they were political prisoners. So please confirm it, please provide me with that status. It's ludicrous because the government was in negotiations. The president himself was called in those negotiations. He called those people political prisoners, and now the Minister of Reintegration has such a surprising position, which is in contradiction to the law itself, because it says that the people who were imprisoned due to political reasons or were taken civilian hostages, and that fact was recognized because even before the law has taken effect, the commission was working. So in the same way, they were recognizing that fact, they were providing aid. So if those people were recognized as political prisoners before, they don't need to undergo another recognition procedure. It is clearly stipulated by the law. For the time being, this law is not being complied with, and this problem that Stanislav is talking about, it exists with non-provision of excerpts. According to our information, they have not just approved that excerpt. I don't know why does it take so long, why it couldn't have been done within a year, but in fact the Ministry of Reintegration today, when they don't provide excerpts to those people who were the Russian political prisoners, it deprives those people of all those titles and exemptions contemplated by the law, like that payment of 100,000 hryvnias per year, per every year of imprisonment, that obviously those people need, for their recuperation, to get normal treatment, to get reintegrated back to the society after all those years of horror they were experiencing. This is a very good question, and I hope that perhaps we will hear an answer to this question when the Ministry of Reintegration will report, I hope, on compliance with this law. We will have a meeting of the Parliamentary Committee on Human Rights, the annual hearing, or after 1 year this law has taken effect. It will be happening shortly in November. If it's not for the Ministry of Reintegration, we will do it. We will make an alternative statement, alternative report with monitoring of situation, and we will say that within a year nothing was done by the ministry. We have a lot of pictures, we have a lot of public addresses, a lot of slogans, and honestly a lot of populism that yes, we take care. Well, if you do take care, so where's this care? Do some elementary things, just approve the documents, approve the mechanisms, adopt the necessary legal acts. It's just a beautiful law, but to make it work you need auxiliary legal acts. Unfortunately, Miss Lilia was not able to get connected, but she sent me the text that I'm about to read. For the time being, my husband is in confinement cell too. I'm reminding everybody it's the text sent by Lilia Suleimanova, the wife of a political prisoner Ahmed Suleimanov. Is prohibited to lie from 6 in the morning to 10 in the night. There are special benches, but they're very small, so he stays on his feet during all day, and his hands start hurting. After 2200, they cannot stand up from the bed. His Quran, his medicines were taken away, along with his pulse oximeter and tonometer. The nutrition is unfit for his medical conditions. The parcels are allowed to be handed over just once in 3 months. It's a torture and a genocide. I urge everybody to pay attention to the situation with my husband. He was not supposed to be arrested. He is accused of for fabricated reasons, and his medical condition is unfit for being held in a prison. They just sent him for death. In politically motivated cases, the accusations are political, but by giving publicity to all this, it can relieve the condition of the political prisoners of his on to relieve him of his detention. So those were the words of Miss Lilia. I would like to add, though, a couple of words about the government policy to what Mr. Kotelyanis has said. Mr. Zadhey was set free just recently. We understand he spent a lot of time in captivity, and we've taken an interview as he has come back, and unfortunately he cannot get any type of support from the government, even some free treatment. He was saying that all of the political prisoners have problems with their teeth. This is something that everybody is facing, and it turns out people get back to Ukraine from captivity, and unfortunately they feel unnecessary here because the government cannot support them in any way. The payments are not always being extended. Mr. Zadhey was saying that he did not get his payment, and he is forced to gather or raise some money to get treated. So this is irrelevant policy of treatment of the political prisoners by the government. Thank you very much. Thank you, dear friends. I hope that your messages are about to be heard by the government actors, and their reaction would be respected, because really the people who underwent imprisonment by the Russians and the tortures by them, they really need our support. Thank you. We want to thank the armed forces for an opportunity to hold events like this. Let's continue working for our victory, and glory to Ukraine.